I have some great HOA stories for you today, and you're going to love that title story too. Check out this video in podcast form by searching Austin Stories wherever you listen, or check the video description for a link. Here's our first one. I bought my home in 2001 in a 42-home community. We bought right after 9/11, and we picked the community because the HOA fees were very low at just $51. It wasn't long after that we bought the home in the community. We got a sweet deal because of this, and the business had really slowed after 9/11 before those dues started going up. I was 22 at the time. Looking into the financial reports and into the meetings, it became very clear why the dues were going up. The board was a little fiefdom set up by the developers of the homes. Our management company was a subsidiary corporation of the home builder, and the board members were a combination of one of the home developers and two of the very first home purchasers in the community, a 3-person board. The first action the board took with that increase in funds was to remove trees that were not even on the HOA's property. They were trees that sat in an area that the HOA had access to for weed abatement. These trees' real crime was not that they were weeds, it was that they blocked the nice view of the board's president and vice president. At the same time, the bullcrap violation letters started going out to about half of the homes. You aren't mowing enough. You aren't watering enough. Every petty thing that you can think of, they were issuing warning letters and starting to fine homeowners. Cue revenge time after getting one of those letters myself about weed abatement. Ironically, it was researching the community's CC&Rs about weed abatement that led me to realize the trees that were cut were not on HOA property, and it was researching the annual budget that led me to finding out the huge weed abatement expense that was actually the community's funds being spent to remove trees solely for the 2 board members' homeowners' views. I then found out that in California, all anyone needs to initiate a recall of the entire board and install a new one, if successful, was the signatures of 5% of the homeowners delivered to the current board. That's a total of 3 houses in a 42-home community. The board was issued a recall notice not 48 hours after that I'd found out about the law, delivered to the management company in person. Ironically, the home builder's corporate office was in the exact same building as the management company. You think they would have wanted to not make their association so obvious, but hey, it was 2002. This is also when I found out that the management company basically had the entire board in its pocket because they dragged their feet with the recall vote. They set it as far out as they could by law in the middle of the day. Instead of holding it in the community like all board meetings, they set the place at a local park a couple of miles away. They thought they were so brilliant doing this. So, me and my wife put together a proxy voting form for the election, and we went to every door in our community. We told them what was happening with their money, their plans to create an architecture committee that would require all homeowners to get approvals for any additions or changes, and everything. It took us 3 rounds around the neighborhood, plus a couple of extra visits to homes that had not answered initially. In the end, me and my wife had 26 revocable proxies for the election. For those unfamiliar with proxies, it basically gave me and my wife the power to cast that homeowner's vote for them, if and only if they didn't show up to the election. The thoughtless board and management company actually made it easier for us to collect the proxies, because a lot of homeowners flat out could not make the time and place of the meeting. The recall day finally arrives. The current board members are all there, the management company representative is there, and 8 other homeowners showed up to the meeting, 6 of whom we had proxies for, and which were revoked by their attendance. They opened the meeting and started saying something about, "Oh, looks like a waste of money, there isn't a quorum, blah blah." I then said, "I'm sorry, but we do have a quorum." They're like, "No you don't, you need 22 homeowners here, and there's only 12. The 3 board members, me and wifey, and the 8 others that showed up." And that's when I pulled out the trump card. I dropped all 26 proxies on the bench table that everyone was sitting at and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but there are more than 30 homeowners present," and then I pointed out the math. After subtracting the 6 homeowners that had showed up, we had 20 additional proxy votes that counted for both quorum and voting purposes. They all got wide-eyed, most especially the management company representative. He came over and looked at the forms very closely and compared it against a list of the homeowners. Even the people that were there and on our side did not realize how much work we had done to ensure the bullcrap ended there and now. The recall meeting was opened. The board members voted not to recall, plus their 3 friends that were on their side. The other homeowners present voted to recall, and the vote stood at 6-6, tied. I then stood and declared that we were voting our 20 valid proxy votes to recall the entire board. Recall passed, 26 votes to 6. The next vote, who replaces the board members? It ended up becoming me and wifey and another homeowner that had voted for the recall and was willing to take the seat. We elected ourselves to the board seats by a vote of 26-6. It was at this point that the management company then stated that Canon Management was immediately resigning as the management company for the community. I then pulled out the HOA's management contract, which clearly stated that either side needed to give 3 months' notice to effect resignation, and stated that we, the new board, accepted their resignation and set an end date for their services 3 months later. The management guy was nuclear ticked off. I, a 22-year-old kid at the time, had beaten them at their game, and I had prepared for their possible quitting shenanigan. We replaced the management company after a couple of months, having had proper time to find and vet an independent company, at about half the cost, no less. Did the same with the gardening services, which was also a home builder affiliated company, also at about half the cost. The old president of the HOA put his home up for sale about a month later after we rescinded all the old violations and issued a notice to the old board members that we intended to vote on whether they had committed fraud against the association over their weed abatement tree removal action. I still vividly remember walking over to Dale's house, the old president, the day that he was moving and giving him a big wave goodbye as he was getting into the car to follow his moving truck. He gave me the finger as he drove out. Definitely one of the proudest moments in my life. Is this not full HOA takedown? They don't think you're going to do it, but you do your research and you take them out. What would you do? So, you won't believe the crazy showdown I had with the infamous HOA Karen, who's been giving me heck for the past few months. Grab a drink and get comfy, cause this story is a wild ride. It all started when I moved into my dream house, this lovely little place nestled at the edge of a peaceful suburban neighborhood. Now, let me clarify one thing right away. I'm not part of the HOA, and I never plan to be. That's where Karen enters the scene. HOA Karen, who apparently thinks that she owns the entire neighborhood, made it her mission to get me into that HOA. She would bombard my mailbox with these fancy brochures, telling me how they'd make our neighborhood the epitome of perfection. But I'd seen enough stories to know how some HOAs can be a nightmare, so I politely declined. That's when the chaos began. Karen, who lived a few houses down, suddenly declared herself the queen of the neighborhood, or at least she acted like it. She started sending me all these letters and emails, claiming I was violating the mysterious and ever-changing rules of the HOA. She'd snap pictures of my yard, my fence, and even my mailbox as if they were federal offenses. I was having none of it. I checked my property deed and I confirmed there was no HOA clause, which I made very clear to Karen. She wasn't pleased. Every minor thing turned into a war. I left my trash can out too long. Karen reported it. My mailbox was the wrong shade of beige. You guessed it, Karen reported it. I'd go about my business, and then there she was, knocking on my door, wearing her "I am the law" expression, pointing out all the things that I needed to fix. It was like living next to a walking, talking citation book. One day, she claimed my rose bushes were violating some HOA guideline, and I'd had enough. I decided to have a calm, mature conversation with her. I know, crazy, right? But it seemed like the only way to settle this nonsense. So I invited Karen over. We sat in my backyard, sipping on iced tea. I tried to reason with her, explaining that I wasn't part of the HOA and she couldn't enforce their rules on my property. She, of course, disagreed, saying something about the greater good and property values. That's when I realized that Karen wasn't just an ordinary misguided neighbor. She was a full-fledged HOA vigilante, convinced that she had a divine mandate to regulate everything. It was like dealing with the self-appointed sheriff of suburbia. But I was determined to stand my ground. I told her that I wasn't going to change a thing on my property unless it was actually against city ordinances or the law. It felt like a small victory, but it was one that gave me a bit of relief. Of course, that didn't stop Karen. She'd lurk in her garden, watching me like a hawk. If I parked my car in the wrong direction for 2 seconds too long, she'd be on the phone to the HOA, demanding my immediate expulsion from the neighborhood. She even tried to organize a neighborhood meeting to get me kicked out. It all came to a head one sunny afternoon when I spotted Karen removing some potted plants from my front porch. I couldn't believe it. She was trespassing. I stormed out, yelling for her to stop. It was like a scene from one of those cheesy action movies, but with garden tools instead of guns. We got into a heated argument right there on my porch. I called her out on trespassing, and she retaliated by claiming that my porch plants violated HOA rules. I told her that was nonsense, but she insisted that they were against the greater good or something equally absurd. That's when I decided that I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let Karen push me around anymore. I reached out to the HOA board directly and I informed them of Karen's behavior, attaching evidence of her violations, which I had been meticulously documenting for a while. To my surprise, the HOA took it seriously. They launched an investigation into Karen's actions, and I could see her furious as the board inspected her property. She couldn't have expected this twist. Sure enough, they found numerous violations on her property, from unkempt lawns to unauthorized structures. She was fined a substantial amount, and she was livid. She accused me of being a snitch, but I couldn't care less. The tables had turned, and for the first time in a long while, I had the upper hand. Karen had been so focused on enforcing her own version of suburban law that she had ignored the actual rules and regulations. She stopped harassing me after the HOA cracked down on her. It was like a massive weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. I could finally enjoy my new home without fearing for some neighbor's daily surveillance. I must say, it felt good to take her down a notch. I'm all for maintaining a pleasant neighborhood, but there's a big difference between that and being an overzealous HOA enforcer. Thankfully, Karen learned that lesson the hard way. The HOA sues me and everybody else. Do I sue back? My HOA has over 300 homes and 5 directors. I'm one of the newly elected 2 directors that came on board 2 years ago. Ever since we got on board, the problems started. Our HOA has received a large settlement due to fires. I'm in California, and as soon as I started asking questions about how this money is spent and so on, I was excluded from the board meetings. They created an executive committee, and 3 of them started meeting and voting on contracts without our input. The conflict of interest eventually escalated, and the HOA has brought a complaint against 11 homeowners, including myself. The lawsuit claimed trespass and interfering with the board business. All the homeowners settled with the board except for me. The majority settled because they did not want to or could not incur high attorney expenses. I was able to obtain some incomplete financials and found cases of overpayment, overcharging, lying on accounting documents, and so on. I exposed them to the community, but it looks like half do not care and the other half is divided. I am disappointed by the collective apathy, and now I fully understand how HOA and management companies steal money from us. In my opinion, it is the new mafia. My brilliant attorney showed that there was no trespass or any kind of interference with the board business. This was all done via back and forth emails between attorneys. 6 months after the initial complaint, the association submitted an amended complaint against me in November. A week later, I compelled them to produce the financial documentation regarding the settlement, and once the court date was scheduled for this, January, the HOA completely dropped their case against me, no explanation. Basically, they simply refused to show the financials, and all the money that I spent defending myself and seeking the documentation is now gone. My attorney feels this was an intimidation lawsuit, and their goal was to suck as much money out of me in hopes that I will stop. I would like to believe that I have some legal grounds to sue the association and get my fees back. My attorney is not excited about suing the HOA because the insurance will get involved, and that is an endless money pit for them that I obviously do not have. Now, has anyone been in a similar situation? Should I just drop this and cut the losses? I'm willing to spend some money because I feel that I'm right, but I'm not sure if it's worth it. It bothers me that they just go unpunished, to be honest. Do you agree with this answer? The 5-man board is the executive committee. If you can prove malfeasance, then sue them as the HOA and as individuals. If you can't prove it, then walk away. Yeah, you're going to need a lawyer that specializes in this with an ironclad case, right? I mean, I'm no lawyer myself, but you really got to know what you're getting into. What have you done? HOA story time. 2 years ago, we removed our dead fescue lawn and replaced it with Zenith zoysia. Both grasses are allowed per the neighborhood HOA. Last year, our neighbor, who we are friendly with and our kids play together frequently, requested that I straighten out the property line because he didn't like that the zoysia goes dormant and turns brown during the winter months. I did as requested. Nothing else was said about it until about a month ago. He put hundreds of dollars worth of rocks on the same property line that I had straightened out. He said that he thought that it would stop my grass from spreading onto his lawn. Last week, he texted requesting that I meet him outside. He told me my grass was spreading into his lawn and he wanted to know what I would do about it. I told him that the HOA allows for my grass, that I didn't think it was spreading, that a lot of the brown he was seeing was due to the kids playing outside, and the brown zoysia, which is still partially dormant, was just coming off by the lawn. Basically, it sheds when you're running all over it the way that we have been. He's also been dealing with infestations of Bermuda grass, which, like zoysia, goes dormant and turns brown in the winter. I offered to let him mix up some of my herbicide, which is helping me deal with the Bermuda in my lawn. He did not accept. Post our meeting, he appears to have sprayed some type of herbicide that's wiped out his fescue beyond where the rocks are. During the end of our discussion, I told him that we could install in-ground edging if that's what he wants to do, meaning that I would help him put it in. Although today, he texted stating that he believed that I would be the one to pay for it, and I believe he thinks also put it in after asking me when I was going to do so. He does not believe he should have to pay for the edging. My wife and I feel similarly. Since I said that, he has told me, all via text, that putting in a grass that spreads was not very neighborly. I told him that I was sorry that he felt that way and reiterated that the HOA allows for my type of grass. That I had fixed the property line with my own time and effort, even though it hadn't mattered to me. That the rocks that he put in were done so without discussing it with me, but that was fine since it is his property. But that the grass that died was not a result of anything that I or the zoysia did, and I didn't think the conversation was one to be had over a text message. There was some more back and forth, but it exceeds the character limit to include it. But the last thing that he texted was, "I just reread your text. I put rocks in without discussing. You have a lot of nerve. You never discussed this grass with me at all. You just put it in." At this point, I feel like our neighbor has abandoned all sense of pleasantness, but neither of us are probably going anywhere for the next decade, and my wife and I would like to know if we are in the wrong here and what, if anything, we should do. Are we the butt? Do you agree with this? Zoysia is tough and drought tolerant, so it's better for the environment than many other grasses. This is a ridiculous fight. Stop engaging, just shrug and walk away. I mean, how do you go above and beyond to try to work with the situation and then the neighbor just keeps doing it? How would have you handled him? Wow. HOA Karen tows my car, but I'm not even in the HOA. Click the video on your screen so you find out what happens to that Karen, and I'll see you there.